At a prestigious high school graduation, a decorated black Marine father was humiliated by security guards demanding he leave the ceremony. What no one expected was the thunderous response: 6 Navy SEALs in full dress uniform standing up, saluting him, and delivering a lesson in respect that silenced the entire auditorium. The morning sun shimmered through the tall windows of Crestwood Preparatory Academy, painting golden lines across the rows of pristine white folding chairs arranged on the football field. It was graduation day, an event meticulously planned, funded by affluent donors, and coordinated to military precision. Banners fluttered in the summer breeze. Students in blue and gold gowns buzzed with anticipation behind the stage, and parents filled the seats with cameras ready and hearts full. Among them sat Master Sergeant Elijah Thompson, a tall, broad-shouldered black man in his sharply pressed Marine Corps dress blues, adorned with ribbons and medals that reflected his decades of service to the country. For Eli, this day marked something far more sacred than pomp and ceremony. It was a redemption of sorts. Years of overseas deployments, missed birthdays, and brief tearful reunions had built a wedge between him and his only son, Marcus. The young man had grown up with Skype calls and folded American flags in the living room, yet here they were, the most important day of Marcus's young life. The proud Marine sat alone in the second row, silent and still, his cap resting on his lap, his sharp eyes locked on the stage. Every inch of him radiated pride, even if he had always struggled to express it. The orchestra began to play Pomp and Circumstance, and the graduating class marched onto the stage. Cameras clicked and flashed, families cheered, but Eli remained, seated, hands clasped tightly, watching. Marcus entered third from the last, tall and poised, the white sash of valedictorian gleaming across his shoulders. Their eyes met briefly, and Marcus gave the smallest of nods. Eli's heart swelled. The national anthem began, and the crowd rose in nary unison. Eli instinctively snapped to attention, standing straight as an arrow. His right hand moved to his brow in a textbook-perfect salute. He did not sing, his lips barely moved, but his eyes remained forward, steady, unwavering. It was a gesture of honor, deeply ingrained after 22 years in uniform. He did not notice the 2 security guards begin weaving their way to him from the rear of the seating area, dressed in black suits and earpieces. The guards were not school staff. They were privately contracted for extra precautions, as the school board had phrased it. Crestwood Preparatory had never been a place of welcome for outsiders, especially not those who didn't fit their image of a typical parent, and Eli, proud, stoic, and black, in full military regalia, didn't quite match the brochure. As the anthem concluded and the crowd applauded, one of the guards leaned in and tapped Eli lightly on the shoulder. "Sir," he whispered, "I'm going to need to speak with you for a moment." Eli turned slowly, confused. "About what?" "There's been a concern raised. We're asking non-school affiliated guests without RSVP bands to step aside for verification." Eli's jaw tensed. He raised his left wrist, showing the red band. He'd been issued at check-in. "I've got my band. I checked in with the school staff already." The second guard stepped in. "We understand, sir, but your presence is drawing attention. There've been some concerns about your uniform. The school had a dress code request for guests." "Dress code?" Eli echoed, his voice low and flat. "You're saying my military dress blues are problem?" "It's not personal," the first guard replied quickly. "We just want to avoid distractions. This is a formal event." Eli's fingers clenched around the edge of his cap. He glanced around. A few heads had turned, a couple, and the row behind him shifted uncomfortably. One mother pulled her daughter a bit closer. It wasn't overt, but the message was there, in the glances, in the furrowed brows, in the discomfort they didn't bother to hide. "I served 22 years in this uniform," Eli said slowly, the steel rising in his tone. "I wore it in Fallujah. I wore it in Kabul. I wore it when I buried Marines younger than the students on that stage. And now you want me to take it off or leave because it makes someone uncomfortable?" "Sir, we're asking for your cooperation," the second guard said, a little more firmly now. "Please step aside." Eli stood up tall, composed, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked over the heads of the crowd toward the stage, where Marcus was now seated and scanning the audience. Their eyes locked again. Marcus's expression changed, immediately, brows furrowed, lips parted in confusion. He started to rise but was urged to sit back down by the faculty supervisor. Beside him, Eli took a breath. He could have raised his voice, he could have challenged them publicly, but years in combat zones had taught him to control his emotions. He was not going to let this be a spectacle, not here, not on his son's day. He began walking with the guards toward the edge of the seating area, feeling hundreds of eyes boring into his back. The guards spoke into their earpieces, trying to find their supervisor. Another Parentan, older white man in a Crestwood blazer, smirked and said, just loud enough, "Finally, someone's doing something about that." Eli heard it, but he didn't flinch. He remembered Afghanistan when he carried a wounded corporal on his back for 3 miles to the nearest field hospital. He remembered a firefight in Kandahar where he laid down suppressive fire for 20 minutes so his team could escape. He remembered the medal ceremonies, the funerals, The months in rehab after shrapnel shredded his left shoulder. He'd survived hell for a country that now, in a pristine school field on American soil, asked him to move along because he made people uncomfortable. The guards led him to the entrance tunnel at the side of the bleachers. It was shady there, tucked away behind a white canopy where they kept bottled water and emergency supplies. Eli stood silently, arms crossed, watching the stage from a distance. He could no longer see Marcus clearly. One of the guards was radioing someone. The other watched Eli wait, like a man waiting for a fuse to blow. "I'm not going to cause trouble," Eli said finally. "You don't have to stand there like I'm some kind of threat. We just follow procedure, sir," the guard said, avoiding his gaze. Eli didn't respond. Instead, he turned slightly and reached into his inner coat pocket, pulling out a small laminated photo. It was Marcus, age 10, grinning wide with 2 missing teeth, wearing a miniature Marine uniform for career day. Eli stared at it for a long time. Back on the stage, Marcus couldn't concentrate. He'd seen his father led away like a trespasser. Something inside him boiled. He tried to catch the eye of the principal, who smiled vacantly and gestured for him to prepare his speech. In the audience, whispers had become murmurs. A few parents asked each other what happened. A couple of students noticed the empty seat and began to text under their gowns. Rumors were already bouncing through the crowd. Did someone get arrested? Was there a threat? But it was none of those things. It was simply that a black man in a decorated uniform didn't look like he belonged. Eli stayed in that shaded tunnel, alone, surrounded by the echo of applause he could no longer hear clearly. The breeze fluttered the nearby flag. His hands were still his uniform, perfect, but something inside him cracked. Quietly. For the first time in years, Eli didn't feel like a Marine. He felt like a stranger. A-trespasser, an uninvited guest in a country he had fought for his whole life. And as Marcus finally stood up to give his valedictorian address, he held the microphone tight, his voice tight with emotion. His first words weren't from the script. They weren't rehearsed. They weren't what anyone expected. "Before I begin," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the auditorium like a blade, "I want to know why my father, a decorated Marine, was asked to leave this ceremony for wearing the uniform that protects your freedom." The crowd fell silent. Even the guards froze. And from the shadows, Eli watched his son reclaim the moment with the strength he thought he'd lost. The moment Marcus spoke, the entire field dropped into stunned silence. Parents stopped fanning themselves. Teachers froze mid-clav. Even the valedictorian advisor looked as though her heart had stopped mid-beat. The microphone in Marcus's hand trembled slightly, but his voice remained firm, amplified across the entire school's sound system like a rallying cry. "My father, Master Sergeant Elijah Thompson, has worn the uniform of the United States Marine Corps longer than I've been alive," Marcus said, his voice resonating deeper now. "He's missed holidays, birthdays, and even my first steps because he was overseas fighting for this country. And today, on the one day he made it back to see me walk across this stage, someone decided he didn't belong." Gasps traveled through the audience like a ripple on still water. People began to murmur. Heads turned. Phones were already up recording, documenting live streaming. A few administrators at the edge of the stage exchanged panicked glances. The security guards near the entrance stiffened as if unsure whether to step forward or back away entirely. "I wasn't going to say anything," Marcus continued, taking a steady breath. "I had a whole speech prepared about hard work, about education, about the future. But none of that matters if this institution doesn't recognize the very people who sacrifice so we can enjoy days like this." Eli, still watching from the tunnel under the bleachers, stood straighter. He hadn't known Marcus was even capable of such defiance. He'd always been a quiet kid, diligent, respectful, always trying to make his father proud. But now he stood in front of 1,000 people and tore through their silence with truth. "Today, my father was asked to leave his seat. Why? Because of his uniform? Because he didn't RSVP properly? Or," Marcus paused, eyes scanning the crowd, "because he didn't look like the other dads?" Now it wasn't just murmurs, it was outrage. Some parents nodded in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few stared daggers at the guards who had escorted Eli out. One woman stood up near the back and said loudly, "Let the man come back." That's when it happened. 6 figures, scattered throughout, the audience rose in perfect synchronization. All wore full Navy dress uniforms, clean-shaven, sharp-eyed, decorated. Not school faculty, not guests. These were SEAL special warfare operators whose presence demanded attention without a single word. One by one, they began to walk toward the stage. They passed stunned parents and bewildered teachers. Some guests instinctively moved aside as if sensing something greater was unfolding. The lead SEAL, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and piercing blue eyes, strode toward the tunnel. Directly to where Eli stood, without a word, he stopped 3 feet in front of him, stood at attention, and delivered a crisp, thunderous salute. Eli blinked. "Carter." Chief Petty Officer Andrew Carter nodded. "Heard what happened? Figured we'd swing by." Behind him, the other 5 lined up in a tight semicircle, one by one. They saluted as well. Eli returned each salute, his voice caught in his throat. How did you— Marcus, Carter said with a small grin. Kid's been planning this since you got stateside. Didn't think we'd actually need to step in, but here we are. Eli turned his head slightly to see the security guards watching in horror. They weren't just facing one black Marine anymore. They were now staring down 6 elite soldiers who had served alongside him. The air felt electric-like, the split second before a storm. Bring him back, someone shouted from the stands. Let the Marines sit down. Another yelled, "Da." Now the crowd was turning. Parents who had stayed silent began to stand. Some clapped. A handful of veterans present in the crowd, older men with caps identifying their units, rose to their feet with visible emotion. The school principal, pale and shaken, stepped forward from behind the curtain and waved awkwardly for Eli to return to his seat. But Eli didn't move. He looked at Carter. "You think I should go back?" Carter raised an eyebrow. "If it were me, I'd finish the job. You didn't walk away from firefights, Eli. Don't walk away from this." Eli nodded once. Then he turned, and with all 6 SEALs in step behind him, began to walk across the field. The audience parted before them like the Red Sea. Whispers fell away, replaced by applause. Then standing ovation. The SEALs marched with precision, not saying a word, their posture exuding reverence and unity. Eli walked in silence, his chest high, the medals on his jacket gleaming in the sunlight. His face was calm, but his eyes were heavy with emotion. Marcus watched from the stage, tears threatening to break through his composed exterior. As Eli reached the front row, the principal rushed forward. "Sergeant Thompson, I deeply apologize for—" But Eli held up a hand. "No need. Let's let the students have their moment." The principal shrank back. The guards had already slinked to the side, avoiding eye contact. Eli sat back in his seat. The 6 SEALs took positions behind him, arms folded or at ease, watching over him like a silent honor guard. Marcus adjusted the mic. "Now that we've got that cleared up," the audience laughed gently, the tension melting into something more human, more real. "I'd like to share the speech I prepared. I'll be honest with you, it doesn't quite fit anymore. Because today, I learned more than just what I studied in a classroom. I learned what real courage looks like." He glanced down at his father. "It's not loud. It doesn't come with applause. Sometimes it gets told to step outside." Another murmur. This one was sadder, more reflective. "But my dad taught me that dignity isn't something someone gives you. It's something you carry, like a uniform, like your name, like a memory of someone who believed in you when no one else did." The camera crews near the stage captured every word. The principal looked off stage, uncertain whether to stop the speech. But the crowd was locked in. Even some of the teachers were dabbing their eyes. Marcus concluded, "So I accept this diploma, not just for myself, but for my father. For every veteran who's been overlooked, for every student who's been told they don't belong, and for anyone who's ever had to prove their worth just to be allowed to sit down." He stepped back to thunderous applause. The rest of the ceremony unfolded with a completely different tone. The speeches were shorter, the awards were handed out quickly, but every time a name was called, every time a student crossed the stage, they looked to the front row where Eli sat and nodded, smiled, or gave a small salute. It was no longer just a graduation, it had become a living testament to something bigger than the ceremony itself. By the end, Eli stood once more, not at attention, but with tears in his eyes. The SEALs flanked him as he approached Marcus at the side of the stage. They embraced tightly, father and son, warrior and scholar. A local news reporter tried to approach. "Sir, do you have a statement?" Eli turned, smiled faintly, and simply said, "You just watched it." The final graduate had walked across the stage. The last note of the school song had faded into the summer air, yet no one in the crowd moved. The ceremony was technically over, but the energy in the field pulsed with something unspoken. A collective need to acknowledge what had happened, a reckoning of sorts. The principal, whose once confident voice had faltered earlier, now approached the microphone. His tie was slightly askew, his hands fidgeting at his sides. He cleared his throat, casting a glance toward the front row where Master Sergeant Elijah Thompson sat surrounded by 6 stoic Navy SEALs and a field full of eyes that had borne witness. "I'd want to take a moment to address the earlier events of today's ceremony," he began, his voice shaky. "It has come to our attention that a grave mistake was made, one that never should have occurred in a community that claims to value service, integrity, and inclusion." Whispers ran through the crowd again, but this time they weren't tinged with gossip, they buzzed with anticipation. The principal continued, "Master Sergeant Thompson, on behalf of Crestwood Preparatory Academy, its board, and its administration, I offer a full and public apology. What you experienced today was unjust, unworthy of your service, and completely out of line with the values we claim to uphold." Polite applause followed, but it was the kind of reaction people gave when a teacher admitted an overdue truth. Not celebration and acknowledgement. The apology was necessary, yes, but it was also late. Delayed respect never carried the same weight. Eli stood slowly, the SEALs flanking him stayed at ease. He didn't approach the stage. He didn't demand the microphone. He simply nodded, then turned to the crowd, his presence commanding enough without amplification. "I didn't come here for attention," he said loudly enough to be heard, though not shouting. I came here for my son. Everyone listened. I came in uniform because it's part of who I am. I didn't wear it to stand out. I wore it to stand beside him. And if that made people uncomfortable, then maybe we all need to take a hard look at what makes us uneasy. The silence deepened. I served this country because I believed in something bigger than myself. Eli continued. That belief doesn't disappear when I come home. It doesn't vanish because I don't look like most of the other parents. And it sure as hell shouldn't make me a target at my own son's graduation. A thunderous wave of applause burst through the field, this time real, raw, and resonant. Eli turned and embraced Marcus again. The moment was quiet between them, but 1,000 people watched it unfold. A Marine, broken only by time and distance, now reconnected with the reason he had fought so hard for peace in the first place, his family. As the crowd finally began to disperse, people came up to shake Eli's hand. Veterans offered salutes. Parents apologized. A teacher from Marcus's English class wiped tears from her face and whispered, "Thank you for your service and your patience." The SEALs remained for a while, blending in and out of conversations with quiet dignity. One of them, Carter, pulled Marcus aside. "Your dad saved my life. Twice," he said, placing a heavy hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You honored him today more than any medal ever could." Marcus's eyes welled again. "I didn't think it would go this far. I couldn't let them treat him like that." Carter smiled. "That's leadership. And that's why you'll be just fine at Annapolis." Marcus's eyes widened. "Wait, how'd you know about Kamanya? Think your dad didn't tell us every chance he got?" Carter chuckled. "The man carries your acceptance letter like it's a medal of honor." Across the field, a local news crew began filming. Eli tried to avoid them, but they caught him anyway. "Master Sergeant Thompson," the reporter said, breathless. "People across the country are already watching clips of what happened today. It's gone viral. Would you say this is a moment about race? About military respect? Or something else?" Eli paused. Then, choosing his words carefully, replied, "It's about seeing people fully, not by their uniform, not by their skin, but by their story. We all carry one. You just saw mine now, go listen to someone else's." The clip aired that night. By morning it had been shared by military pages, civil rights organizations, parenting blogs, and news outlets nationwide. Comments poured in. Stories from other veterans. Apologies from strangers. Young black students who wrote things like, "Thank you for showing us we belong." The school board issued a formal statement, along with a photo of Eli and Marcus, captioned, "Courage in the crowd." It wasn't perfect, and it didn't erase what had happened, but it was a start. Days later, Marcus received a call from the U.S. Naval Academy admissions office. They had already accepted him, but the caller wasn't discussing paperwork. "Watch the video," the officer said, "and we just want you to know you're coming in as more than a student. You're coming in as a leader," Marcus told his father that evening over dinner. Eli's eyes were misty as he nodded, setting down his fork. "I always knew you would. I just didn't expect you to surpass me this fast." "I had a good teacher," Marcus replied. That weekend, the family visited Arlington National Cemetery. Eli brought Marcus to the graves of the men he had served with. He told him their names, their stories. Marcus listened, notebook in hand, scribbling notes not out of obligation, but reverence. Before they left, Eli placed his hand on one of the white stones. "You don't get to pick the fights life hands you," he said, "but you do get to pick how you show up, and son, you showed up." On the drive home, Marcus turned to him. "Do you ever regret it? Serving all those years? Going through all that?" Eli was quiet for a moment. Then, "No, because someday, when I'm gone, people might forget my name, but they won't forget what you did for me." The story ends. Not with a ceremony, but with a Sunday afternoon in their backyard. Marcus is helping Eli clean his medals, polishing them carefully. A box of old letters sits nearby. The American flag waves gently on the porch. And for the first time in a long time, there is no tension in Eli's shoulders. No need to prove himself. No uniform required. Just a father. Just a son, and a legacy of dignity that no one could ever strip away.